I mean, the Bible is very conservative on some issues and very liberal on other issues. It doesn't line up with any one political party. So I'm always looking for not what is the conservative position on this issue, what is the liberal position, what is the Democratic position, what's the Republican issue, what's the biblical position on this issue. Someone said that change happens at the speed of relationship.
Have we got a show for you?
It is so biblical to care about the oppressed that if you won't watch my Bible videos because I'm too biblical, I guess I have to be okay with that.
You know what we're about to do? We're about to get real. We're about to have conversations that Christians have behind closed doors, the scary ones, the ones that make you feel uncomfortable. That's where we're going. Why? Because we're family. Ustedes son mi familia.
So this is the Brian and Janelle podcast. She's Janelle, and I'm Brian. If you don't want to miss anything, all you have to do is hit the subscribe button to get a notification whenever we drop a new episode. This is the Brian and Janelle podcast.
It's time for
Big moment. I feel like we've arrived.
Why is that?
Because right now, live on our show, Janelle, the Phil Vischer, American animator, puppeteer, entrepreneur, writer, voice actor, songwriter, and podcast host of the Holy Post podcast. You know him as the co-creator of VeggieTales and the lovable and kind of curmudgeonly Bob the Tomato.
Hi, thanks for having me. I love the curmudgeonly part. Sometimes people forget about that. Just think he's just a sweetheart. He is a sweetheart, but he is also a bit curmudgeonly.
Yeah.
So I'm with you there.
And you know, as much as I want to, we're going to talk about all the stuff you've been writing about here, but I think my son would be disappointed if I didn't point out to you, as he was just troubled when he discovered that tomatoes are actually fruits. And
Yes.
he's like, how could you do this to me in VeggieTales?
It is kind of scary. I actually didn't know that till probably 5 years into VeggieTales.
Oh, man.
When someone said, botanically speaking, anything with seeds on the inside is a fruit. So technically, so is a cucumber.
Oh, no.
So, we really messed up.
Hey, the kids don't know.
They don't need to know. It's about God. It's not about
Yeah,
vegetables.
Exactly.
And Fruity Tails just doesn't quite sound right.
Yeah. I don't think you want to be the co-creator of that.
Yeah.
You've been writing and speaking a lot in the last few weeks, and I've loved some of your posts and videos on the issue of racism in our country. Now, not to date you, but I will. Like, how did an old white guy start to care about racism?
You get to call him that?
Well,
Yeah. Did you hear that? Yeah.
That's horrible.
I mean,
know.
you're in your 50s, right? 60s?
Oh, my goodness.
I am, yes. And what are you saying? 50s are the new 80s? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, your character was the curmudgeon Bob. I mean, he acted kind of like he was in his 80s sometimes. So
Yeah, I hear you. So here's what happened. I grew up through middle school in Iowa. Had no non-white friends. We moved from Iowa to a very white suburb of Chicago. Had no non-white friends. I went from there to a small, very white Bible college. Had no non-white friends. So most of my life, I've kind of lived in a mostly white bubble, which makes it very easy for you to think, boy, I'm glad they solved racism back in the 60s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I can relate to that story. Yeah.
And then my brother had an idea. My great-grandfather started a Bible conference in Northwest Iowa. It's been going on every year since 1935. And every now and then, I'll teach a class there. My brother's the dean of a law school in Minneapolis, a really bright guy. And so the two of us decided to teach a week-long class on different social issues. And I chose new atheism, and I forget another one, evolution or something like that. And he said, I'm going to do a day on racial inequality. And I thought, okay, well, that'll be interesting in Northwest Iowa. We'll see how that goes.
They'll love that.
And he brought just a boatload of data that I had never heard before. And it was, research from books like The New Jim Crow and The Color of Law that really unpack, what's happened since the civil rights movement and why isn't it better than it is now? And I was so blown away by just the facts that he unloaded, in Northwest Iowa, that I said, can I have your slides? Can I have all that data? And I turned it into a podcast episode because I just never heard that stuff. And the podcast episode got so much positive feedback of, white guys like me saying, why haven't I heard any of that stuff? It's just, still to this day, the average white household has 10 times the household wealth of the average black household. And that's primarily because of home ownership, because home ownership is the number one means of intergenerational wealth transfer in America. And then you unpack that. Well, why is that the case? And it's because starting in the 1930s, the federal government actively encouraged white families to buy homes through, government-backed mortgages and other methods, and discouraged African-American families to buy homes. And for generation after generation, that happened. And now we see this huge wealth gap today. So I was so moved by learning all that stuff that I started learning more. And this was back in 2017. It was actually right after the Philando Castile shooting in Minneapolis that we taught that class. And then I made that podcast episode. And lots of people said, thank you for making that episode. I learned so much. So 3 years later, we have the George Floyd incident also in Minneapolis. And I start to see, so everyone is talking about race. All of a sudden on social media, everyone is talking about race. And I have a lot of, white friends and family. And suddenly they start sending little videos back and forth about race. And some of them are completely free of facts. There's just no facts. It's just someone's opinion, and here's why this isn't a big deal. And a lot of them come down to, and here's why you don't really need to care about this. And I think, wow, that is such an unbiblical attitude to take towards race, towards injustice. The Bible has such a rich tradition of standing up for justice, of caring about the oppressed, of caring about the immigrant, of caring about the refugee, the stranger in our midst, the orphan and the widow. How are we missing this? And so I kept pointing people to the podcast saying, here, would you listen to this episode? But it's like an hour and 15 minutes long, and it doesn't even, the good stuff doesn't even start till 20 minutes in. So I finally thought, well, I need to talk about this more, and I think I need to turn this data into a video. And that was 10 days ago that I decided, let me see how short a video I can pack how much of this information into, just to help my podcast listeners, when they're talking to friends. Would you just watch this? Would just watch this?
Yeah.
No, I love the video, and we put it up on our Facebook page for our listeners to watch it. For those who are listening to the data that you shared, even as a person of color, it's like discouraging, and you feel helpless because you realize as a person of color, it's out of your hands a little bit, because it's so intrinsic in the history and all of that. But I wanted to specifically know, for those listening, what would you tell somebody that says, okay, that's back in the past, that whole real estate thing and the financial aspects, people just need to work harder. Where do you even begin?
Well, we do need to do those things. We do need to work hard. We do need to go to school. We do need to get a job. But it's kind of like I've explained to people. It's like if you find out that there's a family on your block that generations ago your family kind of went to war with, and set their lawn on fire and put rocks in their garden so they couldn't grow food. And you say, well, today we're not doing that anymore. My family is no longer doing that to that family down the block. Yes, but they still are having trouble growing food because their garden is still full of rocks that have been there for generations and generations. So it's easy to say, but I'm not putting rocks in your garden anymore. That's one thing. The biblical thing to do is to say, hey, can I help you fix your garden? Can I help you take the rocks out of your garden, take the stones out of your path so that it can be easy for you to take care of yourself as it is for me? And I think that's something that biblical love calls us to do, rather than looking for reasons to say, well, it's really your own fault, because I haven't been putting rocks in your garden for 50 years.
Yeah.
Well, how about if we help? How about if we help? Because I'm still benefiting from the things that happened in the 1930s and the 1940s and the 1950s. And I tell this story. My parents split up when I was 9 years old. My dad left. My mom had to work for the first time in her life, and for several years we were probably living below the poverty line. Looking back on it, but we had one thing going for us that actually really, really helped. And that is, we owned a home. We owned a home in Muscatine, Iowa, that my mom was able to sell. She got the house. She was able to, even though she had very little money, she was able to sell that house, buy a much smaller house, a much more modest house in a very nice, mostly white suburb of Chicago with wonderful schools. And so even though our lives kind of cratered when I was 9 years old, we were able to replant ourselves with wonderful schools. My brother was able to end up at Harvard. My sister has her doctorate. My mother went back to school and got her doctorate and became a college professor. I met people and started making films through connections in our upper middle class neighborhood. And I realized if we hadn't owned that home, we wouldn't have been able to recover, from that kind of catastrophic event of having your family fall apart. And the number of families in communities of color that have never been able to own a home because of different policies. Up until 1950, it was against the realtor's code of ethics to help a black family buy a house in a white neighborhood. You could lose your real estate license if you helped a non-white family move into a white neighborhood. And different policies like that continued, for decades. So it's not that far in the past. And the echoes of those policies are still affecting kids that are born today. So my mom, when I wrote that piece, she's 78. She never thought about it that way. She never realized the advantage that we had a house when our lives fell apart. And she was so moved by that she reached out to a friend and said, I want to help people. What can I do? And the friend who's very socially active in Chicago said, well, what do you want to do? And she said, I think I want to help somebody buy a house.
Wow.
Your mom.
Wow.
Yeah. So she's 78. She's retired. And so he immediately connected her with a community action group down in the inner city in Chicago. And within 2 weeks, she had put down the down payment for an African-American single mom who was trying to buy a house. And 2 weeks later, she had a house. And now my mom was so excited about that. She's committed to doing that every year for the rest of her life, of helping one family in the inner city buy their first house.
Wow.
And that was simply because we actually woke up and said, hey, wait a minute. I thought we lost everything and we had to work hard to rebuild from nothing. And then I realized, no, we didn't lose everything because we owned a house. Yeah. And that was currency that we were able to use to start over again that so many people in America today don't have.
I'd imagine you've gotten some pushback. I know somebody might be thinking, why doesn't he just shut up and talk about vegetables? Why risk talking about racism and risk what you've created this far, my friend?
I never really thought about it that way. You're right.
Yeah.
No. You have to care. I mean, nothing gets better if you don't care, So, and the reason that so much injustice continues in the world is not because of the bad things people do, but because of the good things they could do and they don't. Just because you could make a difference, but there's too much to risk. And I just don't want to live that way. And the other side of it is, as I've become more and more connected with friends of color, I attend a church in Wheaton, Illinois, right near Wheaton College, that's for the last 30 years has been almost entirely white. And as it's gone on, we had one pastor for 35 years who then retired, and then the church kind of started dwindling, and so it was getting older and older. So it was an old white congregation that was kind of dying out, and our denomination suggested, what if you considered merging with this congregation that has a pastor, is growing, but doesn't have a building? You guys have a building, no pastor, and you're shrinking. What if you put these two congregations in the same denomination together? And we thought, okay, well, what congregation is it? And it was an Asian congregation that was growing, second generation immigrant Asian congregation with a young Korean pastor. We thought, wow, that would be interesting. So we spent about 6 months talking with them and decided to merge. So we put a young Asian congregation together with an old white congregation. tried to figure out how, not to step on each other's toes, start to hear their stories of being, non-white in America. And within 3 years, that was 4 years ago, within 3 years, the size of the new church doubled as we were joined by African American families and Latino families and Indian families, and then a lot of biracial families, where they were of mixed race or had adopted kids of a different race who wanted to be somewhere that wasn't just all white. And then about 120 college kids a week are showing up because they want to worship somewhere that looks like the world they're growing up in. And because I was an elder at the time of the merge and I'm on the governing board, I'm meeting all these people. And now I have, there's African American families that I'm close friends with. Someone said that change happens at the speed of relationship. If you don't know someone different, you aren't really going to learn anything, that makes any real meaningful change. So sitting around a fire, listening to an African-American father who's 45, and he's actually very successful in business, but he talks about going for a walk at night in his white neighborhood and realizing that he's wearing a hoodie and wondering if he needs to go back to his house and change so that no one calls the police.
Yeah.
And like, I have never had to think about that in my life. I have a friend we had on the podcast, also an African-American young man. He's smarter than I am. He's better educated than I am. He's better dressed than I am. He was stopped by the police while helping a friend move because they couldn't conceive of why an African-American man in this white neighborhood would be walking out of the house carrying things. And I realized I have never had to worry about being stopped by the police while helping a friend move. Mm-hmm. So when you get to know people and when you hear their stories, you start to realize how different someone's experience of America can be than your own, and you want to do something about it. And that's why I can't stop putting my neck out there. I'm reading emails I'm getting and texts I'm getting actually this morning of people that are angry. Yeah. And I don't know, but there's so many more people. I put out this video, 17 minutes, trying to explain what's the last 100 years of racial history in America. And in 7 days, it's been watched 4 million times.
Wow.
Praise God.
Wow.
I know. I can't believe it. It was for the podcast listeners, and they shared it with their friends, and they shared it with their friends, and they shared it with their friends, and suddenly I'm that white guy that explains racism.
And that's great news. We had a text from a listener, Andre, saying he is spot on with the issues he's sharing concerning racism. It needs to reverberate throughout our country. And we're so thankful to have you on with us. You said we must care, and many people want change when they hear some of the data that you're sharing. I love that you gave a practical way your mom is contributing. Yeah. For those listening, it's a big, big problem, especially when you watch the video. And I told you it can leave you feeling helpless because it's a big problem. What are other ways that in a personal way we can contribute? You mentioned what your mom does. Other ways in terms of relationships.
Well, there is so much. Many of us live half of our lives now online. We have a group of friends that we actually see, and then a much bigger group of friends that are primarily on Facebook or social media. And in a time like this particularly, we're all seeing things on social media that we know are wrong. Mm-hmm. We can speak up. We can say something. We can actually challenge a friend, whether it's a real life friend or a social media friend, just saying, are you sure that's accurate? Are you sure what you're saying is accurate? And one of the things that's been most encouraging about the video I made, it's the exact same information that you'll find like in the documentary 13th, on Netflix. Yeah. But that documentary takes about 10 minutes right in the middle of it to kind of make fun of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there goes half the audience right there. They're just done. They are just done with that documentary, and anything they learned from it, they're probably going to throw away. So the number of people that have thanked me for presenting the information in a nonpartisan way that they feel like they can share with their, no matter how conservative their friends are, they can share it with them without insulting their political affiliation or insulting, who they voted for. If we can share information without insulting each other, people actually actively listen, and you can make a difference. So I think, having resources that you can share online that are based in fact and based in history is really helpful. And then for heaven's sakes, make friends that don't look like you.
Why?
Because it just opens your eyes. It opens your eyes that my experience is not the default experience. My experience is not everyone's experience. When you sit down with someone who's smarter than you and better dressed than you, and just almost better in every way, and then he says, "Yeah, and I've been stopped by the police for helping a friend move, and it's in my suburb." Like, really? That's your experience?
Yeah.
That is so foreign to me that I just feel like my eyes were open to a whole new side of my community. And man, having your eyes open is so much better than walking around just bumping into things because you can't see.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Again, we're talking with Phil Vischer of the Holy Post podcast, co-creator of VeggieTales. So I want you to pull back the curtain for a minute and tell us about some of the angry responses you've been getting. What are people saying?
Well, I don't know if you've noticed this, but the phrase white privilege is controversial.
Yeah.
We brought it up a few weeks ago, still paying for it.
Yeah.
Yes. So, I don't even use it in the video. If you're afraid, I can't show someone a video that talks about white privilege. I'm not even using the phrase. The phrase is become too politically loaded. It's almost like wearing a mask now. Oh, you're wearing a mask. Oh, you're not wearing a mask. Oh, I know how you vote.
Yeah.
It's like, what just happened to medical masks?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. So I've got, the obvious response is, hey, I'm white and I'm poor, so therefore you're wrong. And to say I have benefited from the color of my skin is not saying that all black people are unsuccessful or that all white people are successful. It's saying that there are hurdles, that it's harder to run down the lane of an African American child born today, and make it to the finish line at the same time as a white child born today and make it to the finish line. We've put like broken glass in the lane that poor kid has to run in. And it's okay to say that. You're not saying that you didn't work hard. You're not saying your parents and grandparents didn't work hard. And you're not saying that America is an evil, bad place. That's a big pushback. So you're saying America is racist and evil. No, I'm saying America is noble and sinful. America is good and bad. America is kind and hateful. Why? Because America is me. And I am all those things. America cannot be better than the people that make it up. And we are all sinful. We all have good impulses and terrible impulses. We are all self-protective. I can be very selfish. I can be suspicious. I know when I'm walking down the street and there's three, teenage boys coming towards me, if they're white, I have one reaction. If they're Latino, I have a slightly different reaction. If they're African American, I have a slightly different reaction. And I can't help it. It's unconscious. I have to stop and realize that I'm reacting differently based on the color of the people's skins that are walking toward me. And that's America. And that doesn't mean we're evil as a country. It means we're fallen people. You can't create a church out of fallen people. You can't create a state out of fallen people. You can't create a nation out of fallen people and not have that show up in policies, in how we treat each other. So we can't really make anything better until we acknowledge that America will be no nobler than we are as individuals.
Yeah.
And if we're honest, we're not always noble.
And now somebody is going, oh no, I have to throw out all of my What's in the Bible series and my VeggieTales series because Phil Vischer is a crazy liberal.
That makes me sad. But I have been told that. I have been told that, you've ruined my childhood now that I know that you're a leftist.
Yeah.
A what? and I've had people say flat out, are you leftist? And I say, well, left of what? because from the, are you liberal? Well, more liberal than what?
Yeah.
Are you conservative? Well, more conservative than what? I mean, the Bible is very conservative on some issues and very liberal on other issues. It doesn't line up with any one political party or anyone's personal platform. So, I'm always looking for not what is the conservative position on this issue, what is the liberal position, what is the Democratic issue position, what's the Republican issue, what's the biblical position on this issue.
There it is.
And unfortunately,
wow.
I have to figure out then how to vote based on that and how to advocate based on that. And it's tricky because it's not going to line up with any one party. And that makes it really hard. So I'm sad when I lose fans because I'm not, towing the party line or saying what I'm supposed to say or caring too much about the oppressed. But it is so biblical to care about the oppressed that if you won't watch my Bible videos because I'm too biblical, I guess I have to be okay with that.
Well said, Phil. And I'm glad now we're not the only ones saying that we ought to let God transform us into new people by changing the way we think, whether or not it conforms to our favorite party or not. So, and I want to be respectful of your time. We've had so much fun with you. I'd love to have you back at some point. Phil Vischer, again, is an American animator, puppeteer, entrepreneur, voice actor, songwriter. You can hear him on the Holy Post podcast with Skye Jitani. And also, again, of course, he co-created Veggie Tales with Mike Naraki. And you can even go get the What's in the Bible series, which is so good to teach kids about the scriptures. But we've got his most recent video posted on our Facebook page where he's like, why are everybody so angry about race? 17 minutes, biblical, factual things. You've got to go watch it. Phil Vischer, thank you so much for your time today. We love you, man.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, hold up. Where are you going? You know you liked your time with us. You want more. So look down, hit that button right there, subscribe, and you'll get updated episodes, and then you can hang some more.
And guess what? You can help us. How? A 5-star rating.
You can also hang with us live weekdays 6 to 9 a.m. Interact with us, talk with us. Download the Moody Radio app.
Or at brianandjanelle.org.
And we don't put all this together all by ourselves. There's some great people behind all this production. We want to thank Ron Eastwood, Kelly Ryder, Paul Carter, Doug Hayner, Mike Reynolds, and our awesome and fearless leader, Josue Villa.
And finally, this podcast is a production of Moody Radio in Cleveland, a ministry of Moody Bible Institute.
Well, Brian, that's a wrap.
Yep.